Dawn crept over Miller's farm like a watercolor painting, soft pinks and purples bleeding into the dark sky. Tom Miller had already been awake for an hour, his calloused hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug as he watched the sun rise from his weathered front porch. The ancient rocking chair creaked beneath him, a sound as familiar as his own breathing after 15 years of morning rituals. At 52, Tom wore his years in the lines around his eyes and the silver threading through his dark hair. His father had worked this same land, as had his grandfather before him, but times were different now. The 100-acre farm that had once been the pride of Chester County was barely staying afloat. The morning air carried the sweet scent of fresh hay and the earthy aroma of recent rain. Tom took one last sip of coffee, savoring the warmth before setting the mug aside. His old border collie, Max, stretched and rose from his spot by the door, ready for their morning routine. "Ready to check the fields, boy?" Tom patted Max's head as he descended the porch steps. The dog's tail wagged in response, though not with the same enthusiasm of his younger years. They were both showing their age, Tom thought with a slight smile. The John Deere tractor sat silent in the equipment barn, its green paint faded and peeling. Tom had been meaning to fix the transmission for months, but parts weren't cheap, and the latest mortgage payment had eaten through his savings. He'd have to make do with manual labor for now, just like his ancestors had. As they walked the perimeter of the cornfield, Max suddenly stopped, nose twitching. Tom followed the dog's gaze to a set of unfamiliar tire tracks cutting through the mud near the back road. They were deep and fresh, probably from late last night or early morning. The width suggested a heavy vehicle, maybe a truck or trailer. "That's odd," Tom muttered, kneeling to examine the tracks more closely. In 15 years, he'd never had problems with trespassers. Most locals respected property boundaries, and tourists rarely ventured this far from the main highway. Something about those tracks made his stomach tighten with unease. Max whined softly, pawing at the ground near a flattened patch of grass. Tom stood, brushing dirt from his worn jeans. The morning's peaceful mood had shifted, replaced by a nagging sense that something wasn't right. He'd finish his rounds, but he'd keep his eyes open for anything else unusual. The rest of his morning chores waited, feeding the chickens, checking the irrigation system, mending the fence in the south pasture. But those tire tracks lingered in his mind, like the first distant rumble of an approaching storm. Years of farming had taught Tom to trust his instincts, and right now they were telling him that his quiet morning routine was about to be disrupted in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The sun had fully risen when Tom heard Max's urgent barking from the back road. He'd been repairing a section of chicken wire, but something in the dog's tone made him drop his tools immediately. Max rarely barked without good reason these days. "What is it, boy?" Tom called out, jogging toward the sound. As he rounded the bend in the dirt road, he stopped short, his heart sinking at the sight before him. A horse lay trembling in the tall grass beside the road, its chestnut coat matted with sweat and dirt. Even from a distance, Tom could see the animal was in distress. Its right front leg was awkwardly positioned, and dark stains that looked suspiciously like blood marked its flank. "Easy there," Tom said softly, approaching with measured steps. The horse's eyes rolled wildly, showing whites, but it made no attempt to rise. Up close, the animal's condition was even worse than he'd first thought. Besides the obvious leg injury, its ribs showed clearly through its coat, and old scars crisscrossed its back. Tom's experienced eye took in other details: the horse's fine bone structure, the elegant arch of its neck. This was no ordinary farm horse. It was a thoroughbred, probably worth a small fortune when healthy. Or at least it had been, before whatever misfortune had brought it here. The mysterious tire tracks from earlier suddenly made sense. Someone had dumped this injured horse in the dead of night, leaving it to die on a lonely country road. The thought made Tom's jaw clench with anger. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed Sarah Chen, the local vet who handled most of the farm animals in the county. "Sarah, it's Tom Miller. I need you out here right away. Someone's abandoned an injured horse on my back road. It's in pretty bad shape." While waiting for Sarah, Tom sat in the grass near the horse's head, speaking in low, soothing tones. He noticed other details: the remnants of expensive leather tack marks, a small area on its hip where a brand or symbol seemed to have been deliberately obscured. "What happened to you, girl?" he murmured, carefully extending his hand. The horse's nostrils flared, testing his scent, before allowing him to gently stroke its neck. Despite its obvious pain, there was still a dignity about the animal that touched something in Tom's heart. Max settled nearby, keeping watch, while Tom considered his options. The mortgage was already past due, and vet bills for a horse in this condition would be steep. The sensible thing would be to call animal control and let them handle it. But as he sat there in the morning sunshine, feeling the horse's trembling gradually quiet under his touch, Tom knew he couldn't do that. Something about this animal's trust, even in its wounded state, made the decision for him. Whatever the cost, he wouldn't abandon it a second time. Sarah Chen's blue pickup truck arrived in a cloud of dust. The vet, a compact woman in her 40s with streaks of gray in her black hair, took one look at the horse and let out a low whistle. "Tom, this is no ordinary abandoned animal," she said, kneeling beside the horse with practiced ease. "This is, or was, a champion-level competition horse." Her skilled hands moved gently over the animal's body, assessing injuries while avoiding sudden movements. The horse flinched as Sarah examined its leg, but remained surprisingly calm. "Multiple injuries, some old, some new," she reported, her voice tight with professional concern. "The leg isn't broken, thankfully, but there's severe tendon damage. And look at this!" She pointed to a partially obscured mark on the horse's hip. Under the mud and what looked like deliberately applied dark dye, Tom could make out part of an elegant symbol. Sarah pulled out her phone and quickly searched through several images. "Just as I thought," she said, showing Tom the screen. "This is Sterling Star Ranch's brand, Maxwell Sterling's operation." Tom's expression darkened. Everyone in the county knew about Maxwell Sterling, a millionaire who'd bought up thousands of acres of local farmland to build his luxury horse-breeding empire. He was known for two things: producing champion horses and discarding any animal that didn't meet his exacting standards. "The leg injury probably happened during training," Sarah continued, administering a mild sedative. "Instead of investing in rehabilitation—" She left the sentence unfinished, but Tom understood. It was cheaper to abandon a wounded horse than to heal it. "What's the prognosis?" Tom asked, dreading both the answer and the inevitable discussion of cost. Sarah straightened up, wiping her hands on her jeans. "With proper care, 6 months to a year of rehabilitation. She'll need specialized treatment, medical-grade feed supplements, regular therapy." She paused, meeting Tom's eyes. "It won't be cheap, Tom. We're talking thousands of dollars, and that's assuming everything goes well." Tom looked at his own weathered boots, the patched knees of his jeans. The morning sun felt suddenly hot on his neck as the weight of the decision pressed down on him. "And if we contact Sterling?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Sarah's laugh was bitter. "He'll deny everything. The brand's been tampered with, and you can bet that horse's documentation has mysteriously vanished. He's too smart to leave a paper trail." The horse shifted slightly, letting out a soft noise that might have been pain or fear. Tom found himself moving instinctively to comfort it, his hand settling on its neck. "I can't save the farm and this horse," he said quietly. Sarah watched him for a moment, then nodded. "I know, but I also know that look in your eyes, Tom Miller. You've already made your decision, haven't you?" Tom managed a slight smile. "Get me a list of what she needs. We'll figure something out." The morning breeze carried the distant sound of Sterling's private helicopter, heading toward his ranch, unaware that his discarded champion had found an unlikely ally. The leather chair in Sarah's veterinary office creaked as she pulled up the horse's records on her computer. After 3 days of research and countless phone calls, they'd finally confirmed the horse's identity. Aurora's Grace, a former dressage champion with bloodlines worth more than Tom's entire farm. 6 wins in major competitions, Sarah said, scrolling through the records. Then suddenly, nothing. She vanished from the circuit 8 months ago. She turned the screen so Tom could see the gleaming chestnut mare in her prime, ribbons adorning her bridle. Tom barely recognized her as the same horse now resting in his barn. "Have you called Sterling's office?" "Just got off the phone with them." Sarah's expression was grim. "His manager claims Aurora was sold to a private buyer months ago. No records of the sale, naturally." The office door opened and Ben Tucker, their local sheriff, stepped in. Despite the early hour, his uniform was crisp and his badge gleamed. "Thought I'd find you two here. Got some interesting information about our friend Sterling." He pulled up a chair, his weathered face serious. "This isn't the first time a horse has mysteriously disappeared from his stables. I've got 3 similar reports from the last year alone, but nobody could prove anything." "And nobody stood up to him," Tom added quietly. "Can't blame them," Ben said. "Sterling's got deep pockets and a mean streak. He's bankrupted people for less." Tom's phone buzzed. Sterling Stables was calling. He put it on speaker. "Mr. Miller?" The voice was smooth, cultured, dripping with practiced charm. "I understand you found one of our horses. We'd be happy to send a trailer to collect her." "You mean Aurora's Grace?" Tom kept his voice steady. "The champion you abandoned with a leg injury?" A pause. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. We sold that horse months ago. However, we're willing to be generous, say $10,000 to take her off your hands? No questions asked." Sarah's eyes widened at the amount, but Tom didn't hesitate. "Not interested." "Mr. Miller," the charm vanished from Sterling's voice. "Don't be foolish. That horse is worthless now. The vet bills alone will sink you." "She's not worthless," Tom replied. "She's injured, scared, and needs help. And she's staying right here." "You can't afford this fight," Sterling warned. "One phone call to my lawyers." "Make your calls, Mr. Sterling, but that horse isn't going anywhere." The line went dead. Ben let out a low whistle. "You just poked a bear, Tom." "Maybe." Tom stood, his decision made. "But sometimes you have to stand your ground, no matter the cost." As they left Sarah's office, Tom's phone buzzed again, this time with a text from his bank. His mortgage payment was overdue, and they were threatening foreclosure. The war with Maxwell Sterling had begun, and Tom had just fired the first shot. He just hoped his small farm could survive the battle ahead. Dawn painted the barn in soft golden light as Tom changed Aurora's bandages. 3 weeks had passed since he'd found her, and each day brought small signs of improvement. The mare's eyes, once wild with fear, now watched him with quiet trust as he worked. "Almost done, girl," he murmured, carefully wrapping her injured leg. Sarah had shown him the proper technique, firm but not too tight, allowing for circulation while providing support. His hands, used to fixing tractors and mending fences, had learned to be gentle. The morning routine had become almost meditative. Clean the wound, apply medication, change bandages, then lead Aurora on a slow walk around the paddock. Some days were better than others. Today, she barely put weight on the injured leg. "Going backward isn't failure," he reminded himself, echoing Sarah's words. "Healing isn't a straight line." Max watched from his usual spot by the barn door as Tom prepared Aurora's morning feed, a special blend of supplements that cost more than his own groceries. He'd been skipping meals himself to afford it, but seeing the gradual return of shine to her coat made it worth every sacrificed dinner. A soft nicker drew his attention. Aurora had developed a habit of greeting him whenever he came into view, as if making sure he was still there. It was a far cry from the terrified animal he'd found by the road. "Time for your walk, beautiful," Tom said, attaching the lead rope to her halter. Their morning exercise was painfully slow. 10 steps, rest, 5 more steps, another rest. But Sarah insisted that movement, when carefully managed, was crucial for recovery. And they made their way to the paddock where the rising sun cast long shadows across the dew-covered grass. Tom watched Aurora's gait carefully, noting how she distributed her weight. There were good signs: less trembling, better balance, more confidence in her movements. But there were also setbacks. Yesterday, a sudden noise had spooked her, causing her to wrench her leg. Tom had spent hours calming her down, his heart aching at her distressed whinnies. The incident had set her progress back by days. "Take your time," he encouraged, as she hesitated at a slightly uneven patch of ground. "No rushing here." The morning passed in a rhythm of short walks and long rests. Tom used the breaks to groom her, something Aurora seemed to particularly enjoy. As he worked the brush over her coat, he could feel the spots where her ribs still showed too prominently, though not as severely as before. Sarah's words from her last visit echoed in his mind. She might never fully recover, Tom. You need to be prepared for that possibility. But watching Aurora carefully navigate another few steps, her ears pricked forward with determination, Tom saw something the vet's medical expertise couldn't measure: the will to heal, to trust again, to move forward despite the pain. "That's my girl," he whispered as she completed their morning circuit. "We'll get there together, one step at a time." The road to recovery stretched long ahead of them, but Tom was beginning to understand that every small victory was worth celebrating. Even if Aurora never fully healed, she had already taught him something invaluable about resilience and hope. The article in the Chester County Gazette was small, tucked away on page 3, but its impact was immediate. Local farmer takes stand against $1 million stable, saves abandoned champion horse. Jane Cooper, a rookie reporter, had noticed Aurora during a routine visit to Sarah's clinic and couldn't resist the story. Tom found out about it when his neighbor, old Pete Davidson, showed up at his gate waving the newspaper. "You're famous, Miller!" he called out. "About time somebody stood up to that Sterling fellow." By noon, 3 more visitors had stopped by. Mary Thompson from the feed store brought a bag of premium grain. "On the house," she insisted. "That horse deserves the best." Her teenage daughter Emily stood transfixed at the paddock fence, snapping photos of Aurora with her phone. "Can I post these?" she asked Tom. "My friends would love this story." Before Tom could answer, his driveway filled with more cars. A local Girl Scout troop arrived with their leader, followed by the Henderson family from the dairy farm down the road. Everyone wanted to see the horse that had stood up to Maxwell Sterling. "We read about her leg," Mrs. Henderson said, pressing an envelope into Tom's hand. "It's not much, but our church group took up a collection for the vet bills." Tom tried to refuse, but she wouldn't hear of it. "This community sticks together," she said firmly. "Sterling might have money, but we have each other." Aurora, surprisingly, seemed to blossom under the attention. She'd come a long way from the terrified creature he'd found by the road. Though still cautious, she'd approached the fence to accept gentle pats, her eyes soft and curious. Sarah arrived in the afternoon for her scheduled checkup and had to weave through the impromptu gathering. "Looks like you've started a movement," she remarked, nodding at the growing crowd. "I didn't ask for this," Tom said quietly. "No, but maybe it's exactly what both you and Aurora needed." Sarah checked the mare's leg, nodding with satisfaction. "The community's been looking for a way to push back against Sterling's bullying. You've given them a rally point." As if to prove her words, a truck pulled up carrying members of the local 4-H club. They came bearing brushes and curry combs, eager to help with Aurora's care. Among them was Bobby Chen, Sarah's nephew, who approached Tom with determination. "I've been studying equine therapy," he said. "If you'll let me, I'd like to help with Aurora's rehabilitation for my senior project." Tom looked around at his transformed farm. Children laughed by the fence. Adults chatted and shared stories, and through it all, Aurora stood calmly, accepting treats and gentle touches from her admirers. The mare caught his eye and nickered softly. For a moment, Tom saw his struggling farm through new eyes, not as a burden, but as a place of healing, of community, of hope. "All right, Bobby," he said. "Let's see what we can do together." Maxwell Sterling slammed the newspaper down on his mahogany desk, rattling his collection of crystal decanters. The Chester County Gazette article had been picked up by larger papers, and now his phone wouldn't stop ringing. fellow breeders, business associates, even his daughter from her college in Switzerland, all asking about the abandoned horse. "Find out who leaked those medical records," he barked into his intercom. His secretary, Ms. Winters, had worked for him long enough to recognize the danger in his tone. "Sir, the records were properly filed with the competition board," she replied carefully. "They're public information." Sterling ran a manicured hand through his silver hair, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. His estate spread out before him, 300 acres of manicured perfection. In the distance, horses worth millions grazed in emerald pastures, everything precisely controlled, exactly as he liked it, until now. "Get Harrison on the phone," he ordered, naming his attorney, "and find out everything you can about this Miller character." Within an hour, Ms. Winters returned with a thin file. "Thomas Miller, 52. Inherited the farm from his father. Mortgage is 3 months behind. No criminal record. Well-liked in the community." She hesitated. "Sir, perhaps we should consider a different approach. The publicity is exactly why this needs to end," Sterling cut her off. "One farmer with a bleeding heart is manageable. But this story is spreading. People are asking questions about other horses. Our investors are getting nervous." His phone buzzed. The Kentucky Derby Committee. Sterling ignored it, just as he'd ignored calls from 3 different animal welfare organizations this morning. Instead, he pulled up the latest social media reports his team had prepared. The photos made his blood boil. That shabby little farm crawling with visitors. Aurora's Grace. His Aurora's Grace. Accepting pats from grubby-handed children. The horse he'd paid $500,000 for, reduced to a petting zoo attraction. "Send Miller another offer," he ordered. $50,000 this time. "Sir, with respect, I don't think money is his motivation." Sterling's laugh was cold. "Everyone has a price, Ms. Winters. And if he doesn't take this offer—" He picked up his phone, dialing Harrison. "Then we'll have to remind him what happens to people who stand in my way." As his attorney's phone rang, Sterling noticed movement on his private road. More reporters, probably, trying to get a statement. He'd hired extra security this morning to keep them away from the stables, away from the other horses that, like Aurora, hadn't quite met his standards. "Harrison, it's Sterling. I need you to send Miller a message. Something legal, but persuasive. Yes, I understand the optics. Just get it done." He hung up, turning back to the window. Beyond his perfect fences, he could see the distant rooftops of Chester County. For 30 years, he'd ruled this horse-breeding empire unchallenged. He wasn't about to let some bankrupt farmer and a broken-down horse destroy everything he'd built. Tom sat at his kitchen table, staring at a stack of bills illuminated by a single overhead bulb. Aurora's latest medical treatments had cost nearly $2,000. The mortgage was now 4 months behind. And this morning, he'd received a certified letter from Sterling's lawyers threatening legal action for defamation and business interference. A soft tap at the screen door interrupted his thoughts. Sarah Chen entered, carrying her medical bag and a concerned expression. "You missed Aurora's afternoon checkup," she said, setting her bag down. "That's not like you." Tom wordlessly pushed the stack of bills toward her. Sarah sat down, quickly scanning through them. Her face grew serious as she reached the legal notice. "Sterling's not backing down," she observed quietly. "I can handle Sterling," Tom replied, rubbing his tired eyes. "It's everything else. Feed costs, medical supplies, facility upgrades for her therapy." He gestured helplessly at the bills. "The community's been generous, but it's not sustainable," Sarah finished. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through something. "That's why I brought this. Bobby showed me how it works." She placed the phone in front of Tom, displaying a crowdfunding website. The page was already set up. Save Aurora's Grace, a story of hope and healing. Bobby had uploaded photos of Aurora's progress, from her initial rescue to recent videos of her gentle interactions with visiting children. "People want to help, Tom," Sarah said. "Not just here in Chester County, but everywhere. This isn't just about one horse anymore. It's about standing up to bullies like Sterling, about giving second chances. Tom stared at the screen, his farmer's pride warring with necessity. I don't know. Well, I do. A new voice joined them. Emily Thompson stood in the doorway, accompanied by her mother Mary from the feed store. We already shared the page. It's gotten 300 hits in the last hour. Mary set a fresh cup of coffee in front of Tom. The whole town's talking about it. The school wants Aurora to visit when she's stronger. They think she'd be perfect for teaching kids about resilience. Tom's phone buzzed. Bobby had texted, "Check the crowdfunding page now!" The number displayed made Tom's coffee cup freeze halfway to his lips. In just a few hours, donations had poured in from across the country. Comments filled the page. Stay strong, Aurora! Don't let Sterling win! My daughter hasn't stopped talking about the brave horse and farmer. Sarah squeezed Tom's shoulder. See, you're not in this alone. For the first time in weeks, Tom felt the crushing weight of financial worry begin to lift. It wasn't just the money. It was the reminder that people still cared, still believed in doing what was right over what was easy. Outside in her stall, Aurora nickered softly, as if sensing the shift in mood. Tom smiled, gathering up the bills. They still needed to be paid, but now there was hope, and sometimes hope was worth more than money. Bobby Chen stood in the paddock with a stopwatch and notebook, carefully documenting Aurora's movements. After 6 weeks of intensive therapy, the changes in the mare were remarkable. Her coat gleamed in the morning sun, muscles rippling beneath the surface as she walked a careful circuit around Tom. Her stride length has increased by 30%, Bobby announced proudly, and she's maintaining a steady rhythm without compensation. Tom nodded, but his attention was fixed on Aurora's eyes. The dull, pain-filled gaze of that first morning had been replaced by something bright and alert. She watched him constantly, reading his body language, responding to the smallest gestures. Show them what we practiced, Tom called softly, stepping back. Aurora's ears pricked forward. Without the lead rope, she began to trace a perfect figure-8 pattern in the paddock, just as they'd been practicing. Her injured leg moved with growing confidence, though Tom could still spot a slight hesitation in her gait. Sarah Chen, watching from the fence, shook her head in amazement. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself. The scar tissue is healing better than I expected, and her muscle tone... She trailed off, making notes in her medical chart. Watch this part, Bobby whispered. At the completion of her pattern, Aurora stopped and turned to face Tom. Then, with deliberate care, she lifted her once-injured leg and held it, balanced perfectly on her other 3 legs. It was a simple trick, but one that demonstrated both her trust and her returning strength. Good girl, Tom praised, his voice thick with emotion. He reached into his pocket for her favorite treat, a small apple from his own trees. The small crowd that had gathered at the fence broke into applause. Ever since the crowdfunding campaign had gone viral, visitors had become a regular part of farm life. Aurora seemed to enjoy the attention, carrying herself with a quiet dignity that reminded Tom of her champion bloodline. Tom, Emily Thompson called out, waving her phone. The new video has 10,000 views already. People are asking when they can visit. The idea of turning his struggling farm into some kind of tourist attraction still made Tom uncomfortable, but he couldn't deny the benefits. The donations had caught up his mortgage, filled his feed bins, and paid for Aurora's therapy. More importantly, each visitor who left with a smile and a photo seemed to spread the story further, making it harder for Sterling to retaliate. As if reading his thoughts, Aurora stepped closer, resting her head against his chest. It was her newest habit, this gesture of complete trust and affection. Tom stroked her neck, remembering the trembling, terrified creature he'd found by the road. You're the real miracle worker, Sarah said quietly, joining him in the paddock. This isn't just physical healing. She's found her spirit again. Tom watched as Aurora walked back to the fence to greet her fans, her steps growing stronger and more confident each day. No, he replied. We found each other's spirit. Sometimes that's all the medicine you need." In the distance, his farm no longer looked worn down. Like Aurora, it too was finding new life, one small miracle at a time. Maxwell Sterling's silver Bentley rolled up Tom's gravel driveway like a shark gliding through peaceful waters. Tom had been expecting this visit ever since Sterling's lawyers had failed to intimidate him with letters and threats. The car door opened and Sterling emerged, looking out of place in his tailored suit and Italian leather shoes. Two men in dark suits, bodyguards or lawyers, Tom couldn't tell, flanked him as he approached the fence where Aurora grazed peacefully. "Impressive work, Miller," Sterling called out, his voice carrying the practiced smoothness of someone used to getting his way. "You've done well with her. Better than I expected." Tom continued stacking hay bales, deliberately making Sterling wait. Only when he'd finished the row did he turn to face his visitor. "She did the work. I just gave her a chance." Sterling's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's talk business. I have a new offer, $250,000. Cash. Enough to save this." He glanced around dismissively. "Charming little operation of yours." Tom felt rather than saw Aurora lift her head, sensing the tension. The mare moved closer to him, her recovery evident in her fluid motion. "Not interested," Tom replied simply. Sterling's polished facade cracked slightly. "Don't be a fool, Miller. This little social media circus you've created, it won't last. The crowdfunding will dry up, the visitors will stop coming. But the bills, they'll keep coming." "Is that what this is really about?" Tom asked quietly. "The social media attention?" One of Sterling's hands clenched briefly. "3 other owners have contacted me about horses I've sold. Animal welfare organizations are requesting investigations. My reputation—" "Your reputation?" Tom's voice hardened. "You abandoned her to die on a back road. You threw her away like garbage because she was injured. That's your real reputation, Mr. Sterling." Sterling stepped closer to the fence, lowering his voice. "Listen carefully. If you don't accept this offer, I'll bury you in lawsuits. I'll contest every permit this farm has ever received. I'll make sure no feed store in 3 counties will sell to you. By the time my lawyers are done—" A soft nicker interrupted him. Aurora had moved to stand beside Tom, her head held high, eyes fixed on Sterling. There was no fear in her stance, only quiet strength. "Look at her," Tom said. "Really look. She's not just a business asset or a line item on your spreadsheet. She's alive, she feels, she trusts, and she remembers." Sterling's face flushed dark red. "You have 24 hours to reconsider. After that—" He turned sharply, striding back to his car. "After that, you'll wish you'd taken the money." Tom watched the Bentley disappear in a cloud of dust. Aurora pressed her head against his shoulder, and he stroked her neck automatically, feeling her solid warmth. "It's okay, girl," he murmured. "We've come too far to back down now." But as the dust settled, Tom couldn't shake the cold feeling that Sterling's visit wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration of war. "You want to do what?" Tom stared at Bobby Chen in disbelief. The young man stood in the barn aisle, clutching a flyer for the upcoming Chester County Fair Horse Show. "Just hear me out," Bobby said, his excitement barely contained. "Aurora's recovery has exceeded all our expectations. Her gait is almost normal. She's regained her muscle tone and her spirit. Well, just look at her." They both turned to watch Aurora in her stall. The mare was alert, ears forward, following their conversation with intelligent interest. Gone was the skeletal, terrified creature from 6 months ago. In her place stood a horse that was beginning to remember her champion bloodline. "Bobby, she's not ready for a show," Tom protested. "The stress, the crowds—" "It's not about winning," Sarah Chen interrupted, entering the barn with her medical kit. "The fair's always been about community, showing progress, celebrating small victories." Tom shook his head. "Sterling will be there. He always displays his horses at the fair." "Exactly," Bobby said, spreading the flyer on a hay bale. "Right now, Sterling's trying to paint you as some social media opportunist who stole his horse. But if people see Aurora in person, See how she's thrived under your care." "We're not doing this to prove anything to Sterling," Tom said firmly. "No," Sarah agreed. "We're doing it to show everyone what's possible when you choose compassion over profit, when you give someone, human or horse, a second chance." Aurora nickered softly, reaching over her stall door to nose at the flyer. Tom couldn't help but smile. Her curiosity, once crushed by fear and pain, had become one of her most endearing qualities. "The therapeutic riding division would be perfect," Bobby continued. "It's all about recovery and progress, not just performance. Plus," he grinned, "Emily's already designed Aurora's social media announcement for the event." As if on cue, Tom's phone buzzed. Emily had sent a draft post featuring Aurora's progress photos, ending with the caption, "From abandoned champion to inspiration, Aurora's grace returns to the show ring." "The whole town's behind you," Sarah added softly. "Sterling might own the biggest stables in the county, but he doesn't own our spirit." Tom walked to Aurora's stall, studying her thoughtfully. She met his gaze with complete trust, the kind that had been earned through countless hours of patient rehabilitation. "What do you think, girl?" he asked quietly. "Ready to show everyone what you can do?" Aurora's response was to stretch her neck out, lips searching his pockets for treats, a habit that never failed to make him laugh. Her injured leg, once so fragile, supported her weight without trembling. "All right," Tom said finally. "But we do this her way, at her pace. If she shows any sign of stress or discomfort, we withdraw. No questions asked." Bobby's face lit up. "I'll help with the training. We've got 3 weeks, plenty of time to prepare." As they discussed preparations, Tom watched Aurora in her stall, already sensing the shift in her energy. Sometimes, he thought, the bravest thing isn't surviving trauma. It's being willing to step back into the light, scars and all. The Chester County Fair buzzed with activity under a perfect September sky. Tom stood at Aurora's stall in the temporary fairground stables, methodically brushing her coat until it gleamed like polished copper. The mare remained calm despite the chaos around them, horses neighing, children shouting, tractors rumbling past with hay bales. "You've got quite a crowd gathering," Sarah reported, returning from a walk around the grounds. "Word spread that Aurora's here. Even the local news showed up." Tom nodded, focusing on his brushing. He'd spotted Sterling's elaborate setup at the other end of the fairgrounds, a massive tent with his farm's logo, displaying his latest crop of expensive show horses. So far, they'd managed to avoid any direct confrontation. 10 minutes until the therapeutic riding division," Bobby announced, appearing with Aurora's entry number. His hand shook slightly as he pinned it to her bridle. "Tom, are you sure you don't want me to—" "I'll lead her myself," Tom said quietly. They'd practiced this routine countless times, a simple walking demonstration showing Aurora's recovery progress, followed by basic exercises that highlighted her renewed strength and trust. As they made their way to the warm-up ring, the murmurs and pointing began. People pressed against the rails, phones raised to capture photos and videos. Aurora's story had touched something in them. Hope, perhaps, or the simple power of compassion over cruelty. Then Sterling appeared, blocking their path. "Quite a spectacle you've created," he said, his voice carrying. "Tell me, Miller, how much have you made from my horse's sob story? The donations, the publicity?" Before Tom could respond, Aurora stepped forward, positioning herself between them. Her ears were alert, her stance proud. She showed no fear of her former owner, only a quiet dignity that made Sterling step back. "She's not your horse anymore," Tom replied evenly. "You gave up that right when you left her to die on a back road." A small crowd had gathered, watching the confrontation. Sterling's face darkened as he recognized several wealthy clients among them. "This isn't over," he hissed, turning sharply away. "No," Tom agreed softly. "It's just beginning." The announcer's voice crackled over the speakers. "Next in the therapeutic riding division, entry number 47, Aurora's Grace, handled by Thomas Miller." Tom led Aurora into the show ring, aware of the hundreds of eyes watching them. The mare's hooves struck the ground with confident rhythm, her once-injured leg moving smoothly. They began their demonstration, simple circles and patterns that showed how far she'd come. As they worked, Tom heard the announcer sharing Aurora's story, her abandonment, rescue, and remarkable recovery. The crowd grew silent, absorbed in the quiet drama of second chances playing out before them. Then Aurora did something unexpected. At the end of their pattern, she stopped in the center of the ring and, without prompting, performed the balanced pose they'd practiced, standing proudly on 3 legs, lifting her once-injured leg in a display of complete healing and trust. The fairgrounds erupted in applause. Through tear-blurred eyes, Tom saw Sterling storm out of the tent, his perfect world crumbling in the face of one horse's triumph over cruelty. The next morning's Chester County Gazette headline read, "Aurora's Grace Steals Hearts at County Fair." Below it, a powerful photo showed Aurora standing on 3 legs, her head high, while Tom stood beside her with quiet pride. But it was the smaller headline underneath that changed everything. State opens investigation into Sterling stables following multiple complaints. Tom's kitchen was crowded with supporters. Sarah Chen sat at the table reading the article aloud, while Bobby pored over social media reactions on his laptop. Emily Thompson kept refreshing her phone, tracking the explosion of shares and comments on Aurora's latest video. "The state investigators arrived at Sterling's farm this morning," Sheriff Ben Tucker reported, accepting a cup of coffee from Tom. "They're reviewing all his records, checking every horse. 3 other owners have come forward with similar stories to Aurora's." "Listen to this comment," Bobby exclaimed. "I worked at Sterling Stables last year. What happened to Aurora wasn't an isolated incident. Time for the truth to come out." He looked up. It's getting hundreds of responses. The screen door creaked open and Mary Thompson hurried in, clutching a stack of papers. "You all need to see this," she said breathlessly. "It's a petition, started last night after the fair. People are demanding Sterling's breeding license be reviewed. It's got over 10,000 signatures already." Tom stood silently by the window, watching Aurora in her paddock. The morning sun caught her coat, making it glow like burnished copper. A small group of admirers stood at the fence, taking pictures and offering treats that she accepted with gentle grace. "Tom?" Sarah's voice was gentle. "Sterling's lawyer is on the phone. They want to talk settlement." The kitchen fell silent. Tom took the phone, putting it on speaker. "This is Miller. Mr. Miller." The lawyer's voice was clipped, professional. "My client is prepared to make this go away quietly. Full ownership rights to Aurora's Grace, plus compensation for her care. In return, you sign a non-disclosure agreement about the circumstances of her arrival at your farm." Tom looked around the kitchen at the faces of his friends and supporters, at Bobby, who'd spent countless hours helping with Aurora's therapy, at Sarah, who'd believed in the horse's recovery when everyone else saw a lost cause, at Emily and Mary, who'd rallied the community to help save his farm. "No deal," he said firmly. "Aurora's story needs to be told, not for revenge, but because there might be other horses out there suffering in silence. They deserve a second chance too." The lawyer's sigh crackled through the speaker. "Mr. Miller, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," Tom interrupted. "Tell Mr. Sterling he can keep his money. Aurora's already given me something worth more than any settlement." After he hung up, Mary wiped tears from her eyes. "You did the right thing, Tom." Outside, Aurora had begun her morning exercises, moving with fluid grace through the patterns they'd practiced. Each step, each balanced turn, was a testament to her resilience and to the power of a community that had chosen to stand up for what was right. The verdict was in, and Sterling's empire of cruelty was crumbling, one truth at a time. A month after the county fair, Tom received an unexpected visitor. Sterling's daughter, Catherine, pulled up to the farm in a modest Prius. a far cry from her father's Bentley. She was younger than Tom had expected, maybe in her late 20s, with her father's determined jaw but gentler eyes. "I was there that day," she said, standing at Aurora's paddock fence. "At the fair. I saw how she looked at you, how she trusted you. It made me think about everything my father taught me about horses, about treating them like investments instead of living beings." Aurora approached the fence cautiously, studying the newcomer. Catherine held out her hand, palm up, waiting patiently until the mare chose to make contact. "The investigators found 15 other horses at my father's farm," she continued quietly. "All marked for disposal because they didn't meet his standards. Some just needed minor rehabilitation. Others—" She swallowed hard. "I had no idea." Tom watched Aurora nuzzle Catherine's hand, accepting her as a friend. The mare's ability to trust, even after everything she'd been through, never ceased to amaze him. "What happens now?" he asked. "Father's facing charges. The breeding license is suspended pending investigation." Catherine turned to face Tom. "But that's not why I'm here. I've inherited my grandmother's property, 300 acres, just outside town. I want to turn it into a rehabilitation center for abandoned horses." Tom blinked in surprise. "That's a big undertaking." "I know. That's why I need your help." Catherine pulled out a folder. "You and Aurora, you've shown everyone what's possible with patience and compassion. Would you consider being our head trainer? Help other horses the way you helped her?" Before Tom could respond, Sarah's truck pulled up. She emerged carrying her medical kit, then stopped short at the sight of Catherine. "Perfect timing," Catherine said. "I was hoping to talk to you too, Dr. Chen. We'll need a full-time veterinarian." Sarah glanced at Tom, who was still processing the offer. "You're serious about this?" "Completely. I've already spoken with several animal welfare organizations. They're willing to help fund it." Catherine's voice grew passionate. "Think about it. A place where horses like Aurora get a second chance. Where they're treated with dignity, not just evaluated for profit." Aurora nickered softly, drawing their attention. She'd begun doing her exercises on her own now, showing off her restored strength and grace. "She's magnificent," Catherine whispered. "When I think about how close she came to—" She straightened her shoulders. "I can't change what my father did, but I can try to make it right. Will you help me?" Tom looked around his farm, at the worn barn that had become a place of healing, at the paddock where Aurora had learned to trust again, at the steady stream of visitors still coming to share in her miracle. "On one condition," he said finally, "we name it Aurora's Grace Rehabilitation Center." Catherine's smile was genuine, nothing like her father's calculating grin. "I think that's perfect!" As they discussed plans, Aurora continued her graceful movements in the paddock, each step a testament to the power of second chances, not just for horses, but for humans too. Spring brought new life to Aurora's Grace Rehabilitation Center. The old Miller farm had been transformed, its weathered buildings renovated and expanded to accommodate horses in various stages of recovery. But Tom had insisted on keeping the original barn where Aurora's journey had begun. "This way," he called to the small tour group following him. Families, potential donors, and a few veterinary students listened intently as he led them through the facility. Each horse here has a unique story, but they all share one thing: the need for patience and understanding. In the therapy paddock, Bobby Chen, now a certified equine rehabilitation specialist, worked with a nervous thoroughbred. The horse had come to them 3 weeks ago, rescued from a shuttered racing stable. Like Aurora before him, he was learning to trust again. "Our success rate is remarkable," Sarah added, joining the tour. She'd become the center's head veterinarian, splitting her time between regular practice and their rehabilitation program. 80% of our horses find new homes or purposes. The others stay here, helping newer arrivals adjust." As if on cue, Aurora appeared at her paddock fence. At 9 years old, she'd become the heart of the center, an ambassador who seemed to sense which new arrivals needed special attention. Tom watched with pride as she demonstrated her old trick, standing balanced on 3 legs, showing no trace of her former injury. "She inspired all of this," Catherine Sterling explained to the group. "She'd proven to be nothing like her father, pouring her inheritance and energy into the center's mission. Every horse deserves what Aurora found here. A chance to heal, to be valued for more than just performance." The center had grown beyond anyone's expectations. 6 full-time staff members, dozens of volunteers, and a waiting list of horses needing help. They'd even started an educational program teaching local youth about horse care and rehabilitation. Tom paused by Aurora's paddock, offering her an apple from his pocket. She took it delicately, then pressed her head against his chest, still her favorite way of showing affection. Looking at her now, sleek and confident, it was hard to remember the broken creature he'd found by the road. "Mr. Miller," one of the veterinary students called out, "is it true that Maxwell Sterling is funding part of the center's operations?" Tom nodded slowly. "Part of his plea agreement. Sometimes justice works in unexpected ways." What he didn't mention was Sterling's letter received last week. A terse acknowledgement of wrongdoing, not quite an apology, but containing a significant donation to the center's operating fund. Pride, it seemed, could be rehabilitated too. As the tour moved on, Tom lingered with Aurora. "You started all this, girl," he murmured, scratching her favorite spot behind her ears. "One small act of kindness, and look what grew from it." Aurora nickered softly in response, her wise eyes taking in the busy center. The horses grazing peacefully in green pastures, the dedicated staff and volunteers, the steady stream of visitors coming to learn and help. Each one carrying forward the simple truth she'd taught them, that love, patience, and a second chance could heal even the deepest wounds. 1 year to the day after Aurora's Grace Rehabilitation Center opened, Tom stood at the podium facing a crowd that filled every chair on the freshly mowed lawn. Local families, donors, veterinarians, and even a few celebrities who'd become supporters sat waiting for his speech. But Tom's attention was drawn to the special area near the front, where children from the county's therapeutic riding program sat in their wheelchairs, each wearing a t-shirt with Aurora's picture. Over the past year, his rescued champion had shown an extraordinary gift for working with these children, seeming to understand exactly how gentle she needed to be with each one. "A year ago," Tom began, his voice carrying across the quiet gathering, "I found an injured horse on a back road. She was meant to be thrown away, discarded because she no longer met someone's standard of perfection." He paused, looking toward the paddock where Aurora stood watching the proceedings. "But she taught us all that perfection isn't about flawless performance. It's about the perfect capacity of the heart to heal and to love." Sarah Chen stood nearby, nodding as she wiped away tears. Bobby, now engaged to Emily Thompson, squeezed his fiancé's hand. Even Catherine Sterling, who'd become the center's most passionate advocate, seemed moved by the moment. "Since we opened," Tom continued, "we've rehabilitated over 50 horses. But more importantly, those horses have rehabilitated us. They've shown us what courage looks like, what trust means, what love can accomplish." As if on cue, Aurora left her paddock and walked slowly toward the podium. No one led her. She chose her path, stepping carefully through the crowd. Children reached out to touch her as she passed, and she paused to acknowledge each one. The mare that had once trembled at human contact now moved with serene confidence, her coat gleaming in the summer sun. "Today, I'm proud to announce that Aurora's Grace Rehabilitation Center is expanding. Thanks to your support, we're opening 5 new facilities across the country, every one of them built on Aurora's legacy, that no creature is beyond saving, no spirit beyond healing." The crowd erupted in applause. Aurora reached Tom's side and pressed her head against his shoulder, their private gesture of affection that had never changed. He stroked her neck, remembering all the moments that had led them here. The early morning therapy sessions, the small victories, the setbacks, the triumphs. "Someone once told me this horse was worthless," Tom said softly, as the applause died down. But Aurora proved that worth isn't measured in dollars or ribbons. It's measured in lives touched, in hope restored, in love given and received. Aurora lifted her head and nickered softly, as if adding her own thoughts to his words. The crowd laughed, then fell silent as she performed her signature move one last time, standing perfectly balanced on 3 legs, head high, eyes bright with intelligence and trust. In that moment, Tom saw their journey come full circle. The abandoned horse had become a healer, the struggling farm had become a sanctuary, and a simple act of kindness had grown into a movement that would touch countless lives, one second chance at a time.